Okay, so hopefully it doesn't make too much noise because you guys are now leaving the class. Okay, so over here again, we've got to look at denominators. So we multiply with the lowest common denominator, which is going to be 3x in this case. Okay, so when I multiply with 3x, that first term is going to become 2. This one, the x was already there, so I had to multiply with a 3. Okay, 3x is already there, so only the 5 will be left. And 1 times 3x is going to give me 3x. Okay, so let's just multiply out. That 2 plus 3 times 1 is still just going to be 3. So it's going to be 5 equal to 5 plus 3x. Okay, so now I want to get rid of that 5, so I'm going to say minus 5, which means that I'm going to have, it's actually 0 is equal to 3x, but I'm writing it this way around. 0 equal to 3x. Okay, so now we've got to get rid of the coefficient, so we divide by 3 on both sides, which means that x will be equal to 0. But remember, once again, can you see my denominator is a x? And even though it's 3x, it would be 3 times 0, which is still 0. So therefore, no solution. Since x cannot be equal to 0. Okay. Right, so the next part I want to talk about is equations involving the product of factors. So if I were to give you this, and I now ask you to solve x. Now, the first thing that you have got to check, first thing that you have got to check is make sure that the equation is equal to 0. And over here, you'll see that we do have it equal to 0. Okay, so now we want it like that because we know anything times 0 would still be 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, if I make that bracket equal to 0, right? So let's write that. That's going to be my first step. That bracket of x minus 2, make it equal to 0. I'm going to rub this out just now, but then it would look like this. 0 times x plus 4. And would 0 times that bracket still give me 0? Yes. Okay. So that is basically the principle that we are using. Okay, so that's why I use that first bracket and make it equal to 0. Now, I want to get rid of that minus 2. So I'm going to say plus 2 on both sides, which means that x will be equal to 2. All right. Now we're going to use that same principle with the second bracket. I'm going to say or, because x can be 2, and then this equation will be equal to 0. Or, let's say I keep that first bracket. So this, I'm going to keep x minus 2. But the second bracket, I'm going to make 0. Now, that first bracket times 0 is still going to give me 0, right? So that is basically the principle that I'm using. So let's make the second bracket 0. So x plus 4 equal to 0. Now, because it looks like that, I can actually get rid of these brackets because there's nothing else to multiply in with. Now I want to get rid of the 4, so I'm going to say minus 4 on both sides, which means that x will be equal to minus 4. Okay, let's do another example. So basically, in a nutshell, what you've got to remember is, step 1, make sure your equation is equal to 0. Then step 2, make each bracket equal to 0. All right. And remember, when we have 2 brackets, it means we're going to have 2 different answers. All right. So let's look at the next example. Again, my equation is already equal to 0, right? So what we do now is we make each bracket equal to 0. Let's work with the first one. So I'm going to say 2x minus 3, make that equal to 0. Or I'm going to use the second bracket, 4x plus 5. And I'm going to make that equal to 0. Okay, so let's solve both of those. I'm going to start with the left-hand side first. Let's get rid of that minus 3, which means I'm going to add 3 on both sides. So it's going to be 2x equal to 3. Now I want to get rid of that coefficient, so I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides. So x will then be 3 over 2. Leave it like that. Okay, let's look at the second bracket, 4x plus 5. So let's get rid of that 5. So I'm going to say minus 5 on both sides, which means that 4x will be minus 5. Now I want to divide by the coefficient because I want x alone. So I want to get rid of that. So divide by 4 on both sides. So x will be minus 5 over 4. All right. I think we've got 2 more examples. Okay, over here, can you see that first part is not in a bracket? But you could still say, okay, let's put that whole thing in a bracket. Okay, because my equation is already equal to 0, I can then make both of them, hold on a minute. Sorry, people, there was someone in the class. Okay, so we've already got our equation equal to 0. So let's make each bracket equal to 0. So the first bracket, the 3x, I'm going to make that equal to 0. Or let's make our second bracket equal to 0. So 6x minus 8, make that equal to 0. Okay, now let's solve those two. So over here on the left hand side, I've already got nothing added or subtracted, so I could just work with a coefficient. So I'm going to divide by the coefficient, which means that x will be equal to 0. And don't worry, it's not a coefficient, it's not a denominator, so it doesn't matter that x is 0. Okay, let's work with the second part. 6x minus 8 equal to 0. I'm going to get rid of that minus 8, so I'm going to say plus 8, which means that 6x will be equal to 8. Now I've got to get rid of those coefficients, so we divide by 6 on both sides. So x will then be 4 over 3. Okay, I hope you guys are getting this. Let's do the last example, that one. Now, my equation, step 1, is already equal to 0. Now, step 2, we said make each bracket equal to 0. Now, in the previous example, I said just put that in a bracket, but then it's going to be 3 equal to 0. And that's not true. Because there's no unknown, we didn't have to do, let me do that rather. We didn't have to put it in a bracket. Remember, we just want to solve x. No. So we've got only one bracket here, which has got an unknown. Whenever you see an unknown, then we've got to make that part. No? So equal to 0. Get rid of the 4. So I'm going to say plus 4, which means that 2x will be equal to 4. Okay, now I want to get rid of the coefficient. So divide by 2 on both sides, which means that x is equal to 2. Okay, that's it. So your homework is going to be the following. I will see you guys on Monday. Bye.